Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music, any old way you choose it.
Hello, this is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl, and I'll be spinning some rockin' 50s records every week here on my channel, as well as sharing some cool Coca-Cola collectibles and other neat vintage finds. Stay tuned! Hey guys, this is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl, back with another great video for you today. In this video, we are continuing with our read of this 1953 saucy romance novel for young moderns. This is a great book called Katie and Her Camera from 1953, and I have so enjoyed reading it for you here on YouTube. So last week we were in chapter 9, this week we are in chapter 10, and there are a ton of great developments happening here in the book. I'm so glad that Katie got her pictures accepted to life, but we'll have to see if they actually use them in the magazine. So I hope we'll learn about that this week. And there's still some sort of project going on between Esperon and Paul Serrell from the Herald, so I'm really interested to know what that is. And of course, we hope that Katie ends up finding love with Paul Serrell. So hopefully we'll learn all of that and more in this chapter. Now, if you do not follow me on Instagram, please do. My Instagram is linked down below. It's vintage_and_vinyl. And I do my best to share every event that's happening on YouTube, whether it be a live event, a live haul, or a premiere, and that is in my Instagram stories daily. And Misty at Thrifter Junker Vintage Hunter has a fantastic Discord page that you can download the app, sign up for it, and go onto her page and get a notice of all kinds of other events happening as well on YouTube, live sales and live hauls and premieres and all of that. So two great places to really know what's happening as our community expands, and there is more happening every day. Okay, so I know we're all excited about jumping into this book, so let's go ahead and start chapter 10. Chapter 10, the first acceptance. Katie was thumbing through a photography magazine at lunch in Union Cafeteria when Diana Caldwell came up silently behind her and without a word laid a copy of Life in front of her. Katie glanced up in surprise. "Oh, hello, Diana. What's this for? They are yours, aren't they? Don't tell me there's another Katie Owens on campus. What do you—" "Oh!" Katie began flipping in a rush through the pages, and Diana laughed. Right in front, and speaking of pictures, and she turned the pages back to show Katie. It was a pleasurable shock, but a distinct one, like coming without a warning upon a mirror in a store and seeing herself like a stranger. How different the photograph looks in a layout, how unified. One photograph was spread across the top of 2 pages, and below were 2 smaller ones and a short piece of text. There were other pictures on the following page. City Ghosts, the feature was titled. There were her shots of people moving in a blurred stream down an escalator like a waterfall, crossing a busy intersection, marching in a parade, disembarking from a plane in a snowstorm, the children erupting from a school. But not her favorite shot of the parade showing only the marching disembodied feet. There were now a contemporary on the tensions and turbulence of the times, at the same time hunting at the continuity of human species, streaming over and around and down obstacles, editing and foaming, full of life. The text explained how her idea originated during a Christmas shopping expedition, made much of the fact that she only recently taken up photography and in fact had carried out the project with a borrowed camera, and mentioned that she was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota. How terrific! I had no idea they would play it up so wonderfully. Katie began to scramble her magazine and books together in excitement. I must run and show Mr. Esperon. I'm already late for work. Diana, thank you so much for showing it to me. Oh, may I keep it? You are a darling. See you soon, and thank you again. Katie heard the studio phone ringing as she opened up the door. Esperon answered it and looked mildly taken aback. Well, yes, she's here. Walked in this very minute. Katie, he held out the telephone. Paul wants to talk to you. Katie took the phone, casually dropping her magazine open on the work table at her feature. She suspected that Esperon was keeping an ear cocked to the conversation for any interesting developments, but looking at the pictures was a matter of reflexes for him, and she was sure she couldn't resist thumbing through the magazine. "Just saw your feature, Katie." Paul's warm, deep voice came over the phone. "What a debut you made in photography. Has Ralph seen them yet?" "No," she said guardingly. "On the verge, I think. When he does, he'll have a fit." "Katie, this calls for a real celebration. Suppose I pick you up for dinner tonight at the studio, and it's on me whether Ralph horns in or not, okay?" "Wonderful," said Katie, aware that Esperon's gaze had swiveled around to her with a benevolent amusement. "Goodbye." "What a sprightly conversation," Esperon remarked. "Hello. No. On the verge. Wonderful. Goodbye. Well, brevity must be the soul of love these days. It wasn't in my time, so I guess that's the way the wind blows." "Nothing like that at all," Katie protested. "You only wanted to celebrate something." "Meaning, why doesn't foxy Grandpa keep his nose out of your business?" Esperon interrupted with his impish grin. "All right, I'll quit teasing." He picked up the magazine. "By the way, Katie, is this what I mean by a fresh idea? Have you seen this feature?" He was bending over the Speaking of Life's department, studying it. What an extraordinary man he was, so frankly inquisitive about the smallest things, and yet such controlled curiosity that he at will could shed into abyss of the unthinkable. Here he was, completely oblivious now to Paul's phone call, and immersed again in photography. Something like this has been done before. Stryken used blurred movements in photographing a plane, and Bondwich in catching a ballet dancer. But this fellow used the idea for group patterns, in a different way and for a different purpose, to show both the substance and the ephemerality of the crowds. Katie watched Esperon suspiciously for signs of teasing. He could be awfully poker-faced about some of his jokes, but she could have sworn he was speaking in earnest. Could he possibly have missed her name in the text? "It's a sound idea," he muttered, turning the page, "but you see how these could have been expressed more fortunately? If the photographer had waited for exactly the right moment, he might have caught a sort of spearhead formation, advancing from either side of the street. So," his white thumb swooped the indication, like armies coming to a battle. "You see, and here, if he had waited again a moment longer until the school children had fanned out a trifle more from the doors like this. Well, that suggests a young photographer too impatient to wait for that exact instinct. But it's a stimulating spread, very promising." His voice trailed off, and Katie saw that he was finally reading the captions in the text. He sat down abruptly in the nearest chair. "Katie Owens, you minx! Why didn't you tell me they were yours, letting me spiral on and on about them?" He shook his head. "Serves me right for the photographer's sin, ignoring the task and concentrating on the photographs. After all, they're supposed to be hitched together, and you really did a nice job on this feature." "But it couldn't have happened more perfectly," cried Katie. "It guarantees that you're not pulling your punches and being nice. When you criticized it, I knew you took it seriously." She paused. "Do you know that this somehow makes me feel as if I'm coming of age, arriving at something really creative and individual?" "You are, Katie." Esperon was scratching his right ear. "I really must congratulate you. I thought you were doing well, but I didn't realize that you were far along on your own, even when I told Bill Hilton you were independent. It's a feature. I'd have been very proud of you myself. Don't listen to my carping. I'm the kind of guy who would stick pins into a Hamlet if Shakespeare were still around." "And what else do you suppose? It was Mr. Hilton who wrote the letter accepting them? I don't think he knew he had met me or any connection with you, do you? I'm glad he didn't, or I'd have wondered if he were doing it partly out of favor." "I'm sure he didn't, because I just got a letter from him this morning without any reference to it, and he surely would have made some comment on the difference in style. No, you don't find that kind of favoritism in the best publications, Katie, or the editors would soon lose their jobs. They need top-notch stuff, and they're avid for good new pictures. If they've got them from a friend, that's fine, but it's not just because he's a friend. No, this was a strictly professional job, Katie, and it was accepted on its own merits. I can see that you must have planned it very carefully and spent every spare minute on it. No wonder you look so tired this winter. Do you, Katie swallowed and had to start again, do you think, does this mean that there's a chance I might make a good photographer someday? Maybe? Esperon chuckled. Well, you see, I wasn't so far wrong when I accused you of falling in love. Only it was with a vocation instead of a man. Unless you're simply infatuated, of course. He considered and sprang a question on her. Well, what's next? Katie was startled. Goodness, it seems to me I'm just recovering from this one. How do you know what's next? I hadn't thought about any other project. Well, if you seriously want to become a professional photographer, you have to keep the projects lined up. You can't sit and wait for the next bright idea to pop. You have to look for it and produce it. Are you sure you're not just excited about getting your name and some pictures into a magazine? She shook her head decisively. Yes, I like that. It's fun to watch someone next to you open up the magazine and stop to look carefully at your pictures. But what really convinced me was the effect of working on the project itself before I had any way of knowing whether it would be anything or even amount to much. It was so exciting, like learning to fly. More exciting than writing? She hesitated. Well, it's different. Writing is very satisfying and I wouldn't want to give it up, but it has never made me feel so keyed up. That might be because writing has usually been for class assignments. It hasn't been a sustained project or something that has started itself like this. And I've never felt that I was, well, finding a new path or discovering something as I felt I was doing with the ghosts, even in a small way. Oh gosh, that sounds so presumptuous and pretentious, but you see what I mean, don't you? Yes, I see. Literature has existed for thousands of years, whereas this particular bunch of visual art is only a century old or so. Of course, there's new territory to explore. On the other hand, Esperon added, don't make the mistake of thinking the photographer exists on this lofty plane of originality and discovery. There are few, perhaps, who can bring us a tinge of it to every project, but very few. Most of us, even good photographers, subsist on rather prosaic assignments, are sometimes tedious or even boring. Sorry to use those nasty words in themselves. Look at the time I spend now in photographing a sugar and a creamer set for an advertiser when I'd like to be photographing a piece of sculpture. We have to learn to liven up that kind of assignment with sound craftsmanship or imagination in minor details or a touch of humor. But wait, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. You haven't even decided yet what kind of photography you want to do. Well, why photojournalism, of course. Why, of course. It happens to be the angle you've learned most about with me. Maybe it would be fine for you, and maybe it wouldn't. Have you really thought about other kinds? What else, for instance? Child photography might be a natural for you, or fashion photography, there's advertising photography, industrial, medical, portraits, just to name a few. Do you want me to talk turkey to you, Katie? Shall I tell you I would do it in your place? She nodded vigorously. First, I'd give myself plenty of time to learn a great deal more about photography and investigate any phase that looks interesting. I'd try other cameras, the 35mm type, the speed graphic, the studio cameras for instance, to find out what each one is best for and which one seems best suited to you. I'd try working in color. You haven't even touched that yet. I'd learn more about lighting, flash, flood, strobe units, until I could handle all kinds of situations technically. You can't always use available light, you know, and I've noticed you tend to be careless about exposures. Learn more about filters and the mechanics of photography, and now you're doing pretty well with the basics. I'd watch the best of major publications, not only the weekly photographic and news magazines, but Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and Fortune and 17, which are presets. Then I try to find out what I could do best. It might be action shots, informal portraits, news, theoretical photography, and so on. When I saw what direction my work was taking, I'd figure out some projects and start sending them in to the right magazines. And that means knowing the markets all the way from the general magazines to important company publications and trade magazines. I noticed you do quite a bit of work for magazines like Friends, published for Chevrolet owners. Is that what you mean? That's it. Their standards are high, but you don't face quite as stiff competition as in major targets. And you don't make the mistake of jumping right into photography as such. Feel your way around. Get work that is related to it, and possibly you can use it as a supplement to your job. Don't be rigid. Explore anything that comes your way if reasonably possible. You can learn so much. How about journalism? Are you still thinking of working on a newspaper? Well, I'd rather work for a magazine, Katie admitted, but I know both fields are terribly crowded. And yes, I'm still interested in newspaper work. Excellent training. If you could get a job on a small town newspaper, that would make an ideal start. That's what Paul was telling me before Christmas. He said I'd learn about deadlines, layout, type, news values, and would see the whole process from start to finish. He's right. Ye gods, is it 3 o'clock already? Katie, this stack of photographs has to go out today. Get them out and we'll dine in state tonight to celebrate. What's the matter? Oh, well, that's what Paul called about. Yes, but we'd love to have you come along, Katie said hastily. He's going to pick me up here. At the table for 3 in Chic's Cafe, Katie felt as if she had been transplanted into the gay 90s. The waiter hovered attentively, and the cafe was dim rather than subtle or garnish in decor. The gypsy singers as cheerfully abandoned the stereotype as they must have been when a bet a million Gates watched the tiny stage and entertained his friends. Katie and Esperon had talked photography to the exclusion of everything else. Esperon reminiscing about his early experiences and planning a program for Katie to follow. But how quiet Paul had been all evening. Katie turned to him with a smile to tease him about his unwanted silence and found him watching her steadily. She couldn't interpret his expression. Curiosity, appraisal, a touch of hostility. Uncomfortable under the gaze, she looked away, forgetting to tease with a queer sense of verging on, well, she wasn't sure. He was entitled to a little displeasure, she thought. Ralph had crashed his party and monopolized the conversation. No wonder he felt dissatisfied. It wasn't fair. Disturbed, she moved slightly in her chair, shifting enough to see Paul with a more casual turn of the head. When she looked at him, her eyes were brooding and concerned, shy of finding again that strange look on his face, as if he had just met her for some reason and disliked her right away. Only this time, as if reassurance, a smile on his face creeped deeper in the lines at the side of his mouth when he returned her gaze. His hand, which had been resting on the table, reached up and softly brushed her cheek for a moment. She found herself smiling back at him, mystified at the depth of her relief. Not a word had been spoken, but she had strong feelings that during the evening he had been struggling with some undefined issue that was important to him, and that a crisis had been passed, though she was baffled as to what it might be. Now Paul was maybe nothing had, yet she could not dislodge the certainty that it had, and that in some way it involved her. When the last gypsy had vanished from the stage, Paul removed his pipe and went through the ritual of emptying it with the aid of the little chrome gadget. "Have you began any type of job campaign yet?" he asked her in a perfectly ordinary voice. "So far, I've only registered with the Student Placement Bureau at the university. I was going to type up a resume, but there was so little to put in it that it might not be worth bothering with." "I'd do anyhow, Katie. Even if this job with Ralph is the only one you've ever had, look at what it involves. Secretarial work, research, reception work, darkroom work, and even editing. And you must have had something published in the daily, haven't you? Last year, I was just beginning to do a little work on the paper, but this year there's been no time. Would the live feature help? It certainly would. You see, the very fact that you can organize an intelligent resume means something to the employer, even if you don't have much experience. I was thinking, even if you're still interested in the idea of working for a small town paper, I can't promise you anything, but I do sometimes hear about beginning jobs that are open. Should I let you know? I wish you would. Most of the journalism graduates are easily placed, but I don't have a full major in journalism, so it's harder to place me. Your photography might be just the useful extra some paper might want, but most of these papers, of course, rely on the pictures supplied by the press associations. But a reporter who can also take photographs can make herself very useful. It was late when Paul dropped Esperon off and then drove Katie home. It was a wonderful evening, Katie said shyly as they walked up to the door. She wanted to ask him what had troubled him during the evening, but she didn't quite dare. Paul looked down at her and laughed. Never play poker, Katie. Your face is such a giveaway. Everything you think is right there in your eyes. If you were worried that Ralph was taking over my party, it wasn't that at all. Then what was it? It's a little bit complicated. I'm afraid I'm going to have to be exasperating again and tell you it's something that I'll explain another time. Good night, Katie. So guys, that is it for chapter 10 of Katie and her camera. Wow, I can't believe Katie got her pictures actually printed in the Life magazine. How cool is that? And that dinner celebration. What was going on with Paul Serrell? Very, very interested in that, and we'll see what Katie's future holds if she decides to go the photography or journalism route or combine both. So I'm very, very interested in this. This is such a fun book, and I'm so glad you guys are along for the read. So thank you, thank you, thank you for tuning in every Monday, and I hope you guys will be kind, stay in, stay safe, and binge YouTube.
That's why I go for that rock